Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, ladies and gentlemen. Today on the show we have Zach Leary, son of Timothy Leary. He's the host of the MAPS podcast and has made quite a name for himself in a bunch of different worlds, and was a really awesome guest in the show. And yeah, really excited to share him and some of his message with you. He's been a guest on Joe Rogan and a number of other psychedelic podcasts. He's been in the scene for a long time, so I think you're really going to like it. You might also check out some of his appearances on the Duncan Trussell Family Hour if you're up for a laugh. Zach is a futurist, a psychedelic thinker, and quite into the... I don't know how to say it. He grew up with Ram Dass, and Ram Dass's relationship with his guru certainly seemed to influence Zach in an interesting way. And I think Zach strikes a really great middle ground for an example of what a spiritual practitioner and psychedelic person looks like. So I think you're really going to like the show. We have a super great time with Zach, super smart guy, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more from Zach in the future. That's just an estimate, total guess, but I think he's going to be making some waves in the future just based on how great of a time we had here recording and some stuff he shared on the show. So thanks again, Zach, for joining us. Really excited you were able to, and hope we can pull it off again in the future. Hope you all enjoy the show. Here's some ads, and we'll be right into the show in a minute. We wanted to take the time to thank our sponsor, Bluebird Botanicals. Bluebird Botanicals is an excellent CBD company based in the Boulder, Colorado region. And I actually personally know, I would say 6 or more employees at that company. And one of my good friends decided they wanted to partner with us. And I've actually known these guys for a really long time, and I really trust the products. I think I even took it in 2011, if they were around at that point. It was really early days, and I started taking a CBD product. I thought it was bootleg. It's actually legal to take across state lines. I think I flew with it across the country. Because it doesn't have THC in it, it is legal. And it's legal in all states in the U.S. except for South Dakota. And I don't believe Bluebird can currently ship internationally, though I'm sure as soon as that's possible, they'll do it. It's a great company, a great product. If you don't know too much about CBD, I suggest you dig in and check it out. It is really cool and definitely something you should check out. I've been using it. My girlfriend's been using it. Kyle has been using it. And I kind of take it right before bed. And I find it helps me slow down at the end of the day. I'm a little speedy, so it helps me chill right out. Yeah, so that's it for Bluebird. Thanks to Bluebird for sponsoring us again. I really appreciate it. If you want to try psychedelic mushrooms in a legal setting in Jamaica with us, you still have some time to sign up. We've got a retreat coming up May 16 through 23 in Jamaica, and we still have room left. Applications keep coming in, but I'm pretty sure it's not sold out yet. So if you want to check it out, mycomeditations.com, and hit the application button there. You can learn more on the site, mycomeditations.com. And if you're interested and will need some info from us, hit us up, Psychedelics Today, email at gmail.com. The trip will entail 3 mushroom sessions, 2 breathwork sessions, and a lot of kind of class time and plenty of time to relax, because we are going to be in a very beautiful place in Jamaica. So check that out, and we'd love to have you if you're interested in coming. If you want to support the show with some small regular donations, we have a Patreon site, patreon.com/psychedelics today, and you can give us a small monthly donation or donations by show. So check that out. You can give as little as $1 a month if you want to just help us out a little bit, pay the bills and keep the lights on, and just improving the quality of the show. In the near future, I think we need to buy some new microphones, and I think Kyle and I might need some new PCs to keep the editing going. So if you want to support us there, that would be lovely. Patreon.com/psychedelics today. Psychedelics Today has partnered with Daniel McQueen over at Medicinal Mindfulness on this new and very exciting project you've heard about on our show a bunch and maybe elsewhere, extended state DMT research. So the concept is to use a IV pump and keep a steady blood concentration of DMT in the bloodstream for an undetermined amount of time. Rick Strassman, I think, responded that he would like to try it the first time for a few weeks. something silly like that, maybe just a week. But, I think the initial phases of the study will be maybe 20 minutes, 10 minutes, just to extend that blood concentration peak of DMT that you would get from a freebase or an insufflated dose of DMT. And it's more from a psychonaut perspective, which is interesting. It's not just for medical research. It's for our community. We want to know what happens. And you have an opportunity to participate. We have on our Teachable platform over at psychedelicstoday.teachable.com a class for sale called the DMTX Psychonaut Training. And it is the first step. If you want to be a candidate for this, you might have to really work. It's kind of like an astronaut program, like NASA grade kind of selection for participants. So check that out. Teachable is hosting our class, psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. Kyle and Daniel McQueen ran a multi-week class, and you can get the bulk of it there. And yeah, the class proceeds go to support the Psychonaut training and getting funding enough to push this through to make it legal to do in the States. So yeah, again, check that out, psychedelicstoday.teachable.com, and see if you want to pick up that class, DMTX Psychonaut Training. Finally here, if you want to support the show but can't afford to buy a t-shirt or a mug from our shop, feel free to just leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Facebook, anywhere really, Google. Tell your friends, share your favorite episodes with them, or maybe ask your significant other or parents for a seat to our class, Navigating Psychedelics, so you can keep yourself safe. So again, yeah, we'd love to have you tell your friends about the show or just plug us on your socials. Thanks again for listening, and enjoy this great show with Mark Plotkin and Dennis McKenna. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, everybody. Today on this show, we have Zach Leary, host of It's All Happening and the MAPS podcast. Zach, thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Kyle and I just spent a lot of today digging into stuff that's online about you. We just talked about it earlier. I just listened to the Joe Rogan episode. Kyle, you listened to the Duncan episode, Family Hour.
One of them.
And was there a different one you jumped into as well?
I think you're on 3 of Duncan's episodes, and I listened to one about virtual reality, and I think flotation tanks, whenever it came out. I remember listening to that driving to Vermont.
Oh, cool.
Driving back.
That was fun. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, Duncan and I have had some great exchanges. He's been on mine a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, and I've been on his. It's so fun to surf the waves of consciousness with him. He's an amazing thinker. He really is.
He also makes me laugh incredibly hard, kind of because of how hard he's thinking, I think, a part of it. It's so funny. Kyle and I had an interaction with him at the, it was like a symposia after party after the Horizons conference this past year. And, very late at night. It's like everybody's out of there but a few of us. And he was just cracking me up. I couldn't believe it. But, it's interesting. You two actually have I didn't think of this till now, have an interesting mutual relationship or friendship with Ram-Dass.
Yeah.
I assume you're still connected with Ram-Dass a bit.
Very much so, yes. And that's actually how I met Duncan as well.
At one of the retreats in Hawaii?
Yeah, at one of those retreats, Duncan first came. I'd been going to I obviously have known Ram-Dass for quite a while. Yeah. And then in 2008, I started going to the retreats again. And I forgot what year, maybe 2012 or 13, Duncan came to one of the retreats as a participant, just because he was going through a lot in his own life. And he just was there and really, found a connection with the community and with Ram-Dass and with the satsang, and then started coming back. And then the Ram-Dass Foundation, the Love Serve Remember Foundation, kind of found a connection with him and started kind of growing the podcast, kind of looking to him to be the podcast guru. And then Duncan actually became very influential within the community in exposing Ram-Dass's teachings to a much wider audience, a much younger audience, as more specifically, because Ram-Dass tends to run kind of old. He's the last man standing from the from the '60s group, and Duncan and I have a a great connection through that community. And he's one of those souls and those beings that I think really straddles the line very, very gracefully between psychedelics and spirituality. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he does a good job.
Yeah.
He's playful with it too, which is helpful, because some people take it overboard with hyper serious. I'm like, come on, man. You can't be taking yourself that seriously all the time.
Yeah.
You gotta be able to laugh.
Yeah, Ram Dass doesn't take himself that seriously, so why should you?
So Zach, you kind of call yourself a futurist, which I think is amazing. I actually kind of like seriously considered like how I could put myself in a position to call myself that too. Reading. Are you familiar with the writer Ramez Nam at all?
Sure. Yeah, he was actually the second episode of my podcast.
Oh, really? His fiction is unreal. I love it.
Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, he's great.
It's like techie meets trippy, like kind of like secular spiritual in a very fun way. So like that, he's kind of like one of the prototypes, and obviously like Kevin Kelly, stuff like that. Like, what do you as like somebody with like a spiritual background and a psychedelic influence, like what is being a futurist?
Well, I look at the model and the paradigm for what we call being a futurist or futurism, or what was oh my God, what word am I looking for? But kind of being in that paradigm as a natural kind of way to continue the narrative of our physical material world evolution, as well as I was thinking of transhumanism and just the whole transhumanism movement as a way to continue our evolution as a species, but also continue our spiritual development as well. I don't think, this place that we call cyberspace, the whole ecosystem that is cyberspace, I don't think it is something necessarily so artificial that it's sterile. Yes, it's artificial in the way that we created it. It is an invention from, the human, as a result of the human condition. But I could really, get into the whole wormhole that, the way in which we invented it and the reason for which we invented it was because we have found ourselves in this need to create another dimension of, the dimension that we see here in the material world. It's pretty static. There's only so many places you can go with it. And that's what's so great about the psychedelic experience is it pierces the veil and opens you up to additional ways of seeing the universe. And I think the same is with cyberspace. So I think futurism and transhumanism and embracing the model in which technology can help to augment, the best qualities of the human experiences is a great place to be. I certainly, of course, there are many pitfalls. I'm not saying there aren't. I mean, we can talk about that for hours of all the schisms from the technological world in place, but we have to embrace it. We have to learn to use it wisely and to incorporate it into our entire being.
Just some hearing you speak there, a couple like kind of, I think, interesting metaphors popped up for me. It's almost like we're materializing the ephemeral in a way, like making the spiritual realm like a little bit more accessible in a way through cyberculture, cyberspace, and also kind of making the physical more plastic and more malleable as it is in kind of like the imaginal realms. Like, for instance, transhumanism or like sex changes or, like how much body do we really need to be us? I'm sure you're familiar with somebody like Genesis P. Orridge or...
Yeah, I know Genesis well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So
yeah, sure I do.
We probably shouldn't go into Genesis here, but it's a fascinating person and was like a key example of this like transhumanist like thing. Like you have this body. You had this story about Lily, like my body is my laboratory. I think he was saying at one point. Like that's fascinating. And I think that's, Shulgin, one of Shulgin's mantras, probably internally, at least when he was eating a lot of mysterious drugs. But
inventing yet another compound. I think Genesis is he's one of the great examples of being a transhumanist pioneer. Not only with his approach to his own relationship with his body in the material world. And I mean, God, he was forcing the gender binary discussion way before it became, but also, musically as well. Genesis was, doing stuff with electronics and, way before anyone was. And he's a great, great model for that. Yeah, and he was close with my family and.
Oh, really?
And yeah, I love him a lot. He's great.
Okay, so in psychedelia, do you see any like major problems, like in our kind of like the way we're going about things right now? Like obviously, what MAPS is doing is necessary given our current paradigm and legal situation. But any kind of like issues you see, like these kind of any problems with like the Renegade 5-MeO facilitators, or I don't know, any commentary you want to share? I have plenty of opinions too, obviously, the way I phrased that.
Yeah. I'd love to hear yours and really, and talk about it more. Overall, if I were just to kind of take a quick snapshot of the current psychedelic movement, I think it's a great time to be into psychedelics right now. There's so much research being done. There's so much data available to the end user. The cognitive liberty discussion is improving. The work that MAPS is doing in Horizons, it's fantastic, and so many people are starting to, it's the phrase, like come out of the closet, really openly and honestly be transparent about their relationship with psychedelics and how it's been beneficial in their own lives. And in the work that MAPS is doing, strictly on a therapeutic level about in regards to erasing sort of the culture schism, and that psychedelics is just for, deadheads and psychonauts and techno Burning Man shamans, about bringing healing to, vets and, people who otherwise wouldn't be exposed to it. And I think, I know there's a lot of controversy around that. And sort of about mainstreaming psychedelics into a over-regulated system. And, within that could possibly come corruption is, what I guess the argument is. But I take the other side, and that I think it's the most beneficial, at this stage, the most beneficial milestone we can reach with psychedelics is to get people in the mainstream aware of their beneficial therapeutic properties, and kind of in a similar way that, like, remember when Dick Cheney admitted he had a gay daughter?
Yeah, I'm sure that was hard for him.
Yeah, but you remember all those years ago, and it helped the movement, though.
Mm-hmm, absolutely did.
It helped the LGBT movement because there was someone so far on that side who was like, well, we need to rethink this, So, but in terms of, sort of cautionary tales, if we kind of look back at the 60s, we could talk, really get into that. But I would simply say that perhaps the biggest problem with the 60s psychedelic model was lack of integration models. Mm-hmm. All of these people tripped, millions and millions of people did this work, but they had no model for integration. They had nowhere to put it. So they kind of did it. The 60s ended and they were just like kind of, okay, well, I'm going to go back to work. So there's that. And like you said, Renegade 5-MeO administrators, I don't want to be cynical, but like the ayahuasca boom that's happened in America, I got a little, I guess, challenged, or I should say personally triggered when there were so many people calling themselves shamans.
Yeah, right.
Like all of a sudden. And I was like, wow, okay. So everybody's a shaman now and, leading these circles. So that kind of, raised a little red flag for me towards, overuse and something to watch out for. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember where I left off. I was talking to somebody today, and this thing always kind of comes back when I was chatting with a friend of mine who grew up in Peru. And, I remember asking her about like what she knew about ayahuasca. And, I don't know if she was really part of that culture, like the ayahuasca culture or anything, but she just kind of nonchalantly was like, I don't know, like people get sick and then they go to the jungle and ask for medicine, and sometimes they'll drink ayahuasca. I don't know. For some reason, it just like fascinated me that they just had this like nonchalant thing. Because like here in the West, if you ask anybody about it, it comes with like all this DMT or like chakras and all this novelty attached to it. So I guess like I get like seeing the future. It would be cool to not see so much like bling and novelty attached to it. But
yeah. I agree, and it's one of the core principles I think of Terence's work is that the archaic revival, and that the plant medicines have been a core part of indigenous cultures, and they were for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, and it's only in recent Western times and kind of the shifting of modalities did we erase mysticism. Going to the medicine man was a common occurrence, in any tribal culture. It's just what you did. And Mayan and South American, it's just, and I know not necessarily on the psychedelic trip per se, but, even in like ancient Chinese cultures with opium and stuff like that, you just went to the medicine man and took what they gave you. And for all sorts of applications, physical and otherwise. It was just like your friend from Peru said, it was just, you just go to the jungle and handle it.
Yeah. And, I guess it makes me think that our cosmology or our belief system doesn't really incorporate a lot of those like mystical or spiritual experiences. And maybe that was a difference, it's just like a lot of indigenous cultures or traditional people live in some sort of animistic worldview. And to us, that's like exciting and novel because we're kind of away from it and detached from it. So it kind of is like this, ooh, we want to have that experience because we don't know anything about it or we don't believe in it, maybe.
We just changed the model for those belief structures. It's like, I don't think American mysticism like went away. Like the reverence even of, the Christian church in America and like gospel celebrations and Pentecostal and just other forms of, Judeo-Christian reverence, but they are ecstatic celebrations of recognizing and celebrating the divine. It's not like mysticism went away. It just sort of became kind of a doctrine from that stemmed from an authoritarian point of view, from an authoritarian structure, like the church dictates the doctrine and like passed it down, and this is what you will follow, and this is the book, and these are the rules. And like I was in Italy for 3 weeks a few months ago, and I went to some Catholic churches, for Mass. Really, and if you've been to Italy, you go to these old Catholic churches that the frescoes on the wall are, just priceless, just amazing frescoes that tourists are looking at just to see the art. But the church is still being used for Mass. And when you're like, if you kind of just settle down a little bit and kind of just dig what's going on from an open-minded point of view and watch the Mass and take place in it, it's kind of amazing. It's kind of beautiful. We know the dark sides. I get it. But, there are parts of it that still stemmed from the pagan roots of ancient Rome, and the pagan rituals of ancient Greco-Roman traditions that, paganism was the thing in Rome before Catholicism, so it's just a kind of reinvention of mysticism that it's the authoritarian aspect that bothers me, and saying this is the only God, which is why, people have found the psychedelic plant medicine thing so threatening in America, right? It challenges that belief system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see it reflective in this microcosm, macrocosm kind of thing here with the church. There's only one God. For a lot of people in the psychedelic world, there's only one medicine. And
what do you mean by that?
There's only ayahuasca is the best, or acid's the best, that kind of thing. Like they're making a religion out of their consumption of a particular one of these things. When in a lot of ways, like for certain kinds of healing, you might need to bounce between a few, or maybe honestly, they're not for you because you have schizophrenia in your family or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah. this is something I've been bouncing around a lot. Like, what's the one? Like, if you're cleaning your house, you're not going to clean your whole house with a Swifter, right? Or a vacuum. Like, you have to have a few different tools. So the analogy for the mind being like, there's a lot of different corners. You might have different tools hit.
Right.
We're big fans of Grof's breath work, holotropic breath work, facilitate that ourselves. And we,
Nice.
it goes really far, but it doesn't necessarily hit all the same corners acid does, or ayahuasca, or 5-MeO.
I mean, don't you think that like that belief structure of, there's only one substance, and I mean, I know what you're talking about. Like, I know many people are plant medicines only, nothing synthetic. Oh my God, like there's a degree
more for
fanaticism, and right, there's an element of fanaticism in that. Like, there's only one way, and right, yeah, I'm with you. The cleaning the house model that's a good one, and I mean, I guess I've had this discussion a lot about organic versus plant medicines, versus synthetic medicines, and I think it's a wonderful Pandora's box to open, because I think science, we cannot throw out science, and don't get caught up in the schism of big pharma and and chemicals, and like plenty of good has come from somebody's laboratory.
Yeah, a lot of us wouldn't be alive.
A lot of us wouldn't be alive. Or having this discussion, having this very podcast. I mean, in April, it's going to be the 75th anniversary of the intentional use of LSD and Bicycle Day, and that LSD is like, it's what really sparked the psychedelic movement, right?
Yeah, and that was made in a pharmaceutical company. So
that's right, Sandoz, and Sandoz still exists.
I think I need to get some Sandoz t-shirts. Sandoz 75.
Yes.
I'll send you one if
it's actually funny. I was listening a little bit to our episode with Lenny talking about Whitehead, and I don't know what we got into, like spirituality and diving inside, I guess just like mysticism. And he just made a comment. It's like, well, yeah, that's great, but penicillin didn't come from the discovery inside. Sometimes we have to look externally and use these things in a different way. It's not always about going inside and being in that world.
Yeah, and that's my same, my passion for futurism and, the intelligent, conscious application of technology. It stems from the same belief system, in that, like, we have to start rethinking about what natural means, like what nature means and from the earth means, because I think that, the human imagination and what it creates is a byproduct. If you think, God is everything, right? God is all creation in the world, then that includes the things that we create. Like, if an apple grows from a tree, the tree creates the apple, but like human beings create, not only babies, but we create cars and LSD and MDMA and virtual reality and podcasts. And like, these are extensions of our imagination. So I think it's all part of what's appropriate to consider as a transformative agent.
Yeah. When we kind of got cut off, I asked you about like how old you were when, your dad, Timothy, was doing things, and some of those other elders like Ram Dass and Richard Alpert, or not Richard Alpert, Ralph Metzner. Ram Dass and Richard Alpert are the same person. So yeah, that makes me curious of like, say, Metzner's belief of like getting back to nature and kind of like that eco-psychology view. How would you merge those two together with like futurism?
Well, I love Ralph. I think he's one of the godfathers of this movement. There's no question. But I know Ralph also. He never really jived with Ram Dass's relationship with Nima Crowley Baba, and I don't think he ever really. Really got that. No, either did my dad, for that matter. I don't disagree with Ralph. I think there's room for everyone, but I would definitely I'd put out the cautionary tale that if you want to return to nature and you feel that is, your dharma and that's your mission. You think that's the wisest thing for our culture to do. At the same time, just be aware that there's no stopping the technological march.
Mm.
The train has left the station. Like, it just has. Of course, we can all reduce our consumption and whatever fanaticism about it, but it's too late. We're going to have to, learn to work it out. I think Ralph is amazing, and I think his passion for that stems from the life-changing, earth-shattering, paradigm-creating experiences he's had from the plant medicines. It's really given him the tools to have a mindset about their potential and their effects on the human condition. So he's passionate about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an interesting balance because, in some of my experiences, it's always like a back and forth of like nature and return to that, but also we need to evolve and maybe utilize technology so we can continue on. Right?
Well, yeah. What does that mean to you? Like a return to nature? Like what does that look like to you? I'm curious.
That's a good question. I guess for me, like living in a city is like really like fast paced and overwhelming. And for me, I just like the quietness of nature and kind of being in touch with like gardening and stuff like that. I remember doing a class with Kathleen Harrison, and one of the questions they asked was like, "What's your family ethnobotany?" Just about like your family's relationship to plants. And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, I know my grandmother had really like awesome gardens, and she used to can and jar everything. And in a generation, like my mom didn't pick that up. So I was thinking about it. I'm like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it's very compelling. And I think I'm kind of I connected the idea of the digital detox, the digital detox philosophy and kind of groundwork and ideas that have been floating around now for a few years about how to. Tim Ferriss talks a lot about it, for instance, about how to digitally detox as a part of your daily, your daily life, but not completely throw it out. Yeah. So, I love that. A return to nature, plant food. That's a whole other discussion for anybody who's into the whole food movement, the organic movement, like however the math works itself out. If everybody just planted, one thing at their home that is, constantly recyclable and produces new products and, new consumables, what that does for the economy and what that does for the reduction of pesticides and things like that. So, I think it can all work together. And, and one example I'm thinking of now is that, these rooftop gardens that are happening in Manhattan, in New York City, people creating these, huge, amazing, biodiverse, very complicated organic gardens on rooftops in Brooklyn and New York. And that's the perfect fusion of technology-aided return to nature. Like it can all work itself out.
Yeah. I always think about like the old Star Wars movies of just like having all this technology, but also just like living out on the land and utilizing it like as best as possible. It's kind of like a mix between, this old ancient magic living out like, Luke and his aunt and uncle are just out in the desert, but they had like all this technology where they could go travel to another world.
Yeah, that's an awesome. I hadn't thought of that. Like, yeah, Tatooine was like a wasteland in the middle of nowhere, but there they are with speeders and spaceships and, pushing buttons and totally. Yeah, man. Love it.
There's this one, are you familiar with Neil Kramer at all?
Neil Kramer. No.
He's an English writer, thinker. I'm sure you know KMOC Realm, that podcast.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they were pretty good buddies. And they kind of like bounced a lot of ideas back and forth. They laid out Terrence's kind of like perfect vision in the future. And it would be like humans walking around the world naked and like totally taken care of. And you're just able to like close your eyes or whatever. And you can just jump into the cyber infrastructure and whatever that means, and all your needs are taken care of, but there's, you're just the earth, the whole earth is a nature preserve. It's kind of like the Robert Anton Wilson thing of going kind of like extraplanetary to all the industry could be outside the atmosphere. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard that plenty, the smile squared kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that smile came from my dad, space migration, intelligence, expansion, life extension.
Yeah. I've been thinking about it a lot more lately. I was kind of obsessed with those lectures where the both of them would talk about that kind of thing.
It's funny. I just was having a conversation with my girlfriend last night we were just talking about freedom, like the idea of freedom, and kind of it can, extend from the psychedelic mind and the spiritual, practice as well. But as it relates to these cultural paradigms that these cultural systems and constructs that we've set up, and I love living in this day of age, and it's very cool. There's no question about it. But I do get curious about what it would have been like to live in a time to where there was no paying rent, you weren't paying insurance policies, you weren't filling up the gas tank, you weren't, getting tickets and all of these things. Like, you were just living off the land and truly free, just building structures, living and eating, and a much simpler time for sure. Because that's always, where I run into a schism with our relationship with the modern world, is that we're all have to take place in this construct we've created. It's very hard to get off the grid. You have to pay rent, you have to pay taxes, you have to have some kind of income and use some kind of money, so all kind of wrapped up in this little system. So how do we break it?
It's a great Leo Kottke, Mike Gordon song called Off the Grid. It's kind of like bounces around a lot of these ideas. I think about it a lot. I was really into permaculture for a long time. I still am. But it's an interesting balancing act between being bound and being free. In which ways are you bound and which ways are you set free? Like for a lot of people, if you lived as cheap as possible in the US, like you probably only need to work 5 hours a week if you found a way to do that. And 1700s, assuming you weren't like a slave/peasant, like you'd probably be working like quite a bit, and freedom would be really tough. It's an interesting discussion though, right? Like I know there's people that just move to Alaska and just hole up for 30 years. They just once in a while somebody will drop off some bullets for them to keep the grizzlies out or something. But I know that there's some wild examples, and I was really drawn to it for a while. But I've found the creature comforts I prefer. Having ready access to penicillin 4 minutes away.
People do that in Hawaii too. I spent all the time there and lived there for a year. And there's parts of all of the islands, but even Maui, where people, are literally off the grid. They can still do that, and people go kind of.
It's a lot nicer than Alaska.
Warm.
Depends on what you like, I guess.
No. I mean, go ahead. I just was going to think that's really when I'm just thinking about the psychedelic experience, that's always one of the great, visions and kind of shattering of reality that I've always gotten from the psychedelic experiences, that it, illuminates these issues to you in a very intense way.
Yeah, absolutely. These dynamics are wild.
These dynamics and
seeing the I hate to, that's just the simplest way to say it, quote unquote, the Babylon system, like from the inside while in a psychedelic state experience, like it's just so easy to analyze, and you're viscerally feeling it and knowing it. We have to figure out ways to live in it that make us happy. I think that's one of our challenges. If you choose to be happy, there's plenty of people who would prefer not to be happy, I guess. But I skillfully avoided for a moment there my critique of the 5-MeO people.
So your critique is of 5-MeO itself, or the culture?
There's certain things. So,
and I want to hear it. This is great.
Okay, so like we'll go from the ecological. So obviously it's not great to fly places or drive very far away to harvest these exotic things that are very limited. Like there's a ton of people, over 7 billion people on the planet. There's not that many frogs. There's not that much ayahuasca vine to go around. We're not doing ecological sustainable development at the scale at which people want to consume these things.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Same with peyote. Peyote is becoming very scarce. So that's a big issue. What do we have that works at scale and is relatively environmentally friendly? I believe mushrooms. I believe LSD. A lot of these synthetic compounds are very readily available and take minimal strain on large swaths of rainforest or delicate desert ecosystems. And people, because of the intensity of the Bufo alvarius, like the 5-MeO experience straight from toad venom,
Right.
it gets this extreme religious character, and it becomes a god for people. And as a result, like you're killing the god to be with the god. Like the population's declining, and I don't think it's going to slow down. Like from what I understand, the Michael Pollan book is going to have a big chapter on 5-MeO. I really want to read the book. I don't know 100% if that's true. It's rumor. Don't quote me on it, people. But if that gets out into the mainstream, and he's great with words, what is that going to do to that ecosystem? Unless the black market has tons of synthetic 5-MeO available at a way better cost ratio, $5 a hit versus $200. It's coming back, but it was low for a minute.
It does, though, doesn't it? I mean,
it's coming back. It was gone for years. Obviously, demand is coming around again. For a while, it was just wide open from China. You could just buy the stuff, like up until 2003 or something?
2010, I believe.
Jesus.
Oh, wow.
I wish.
What do you suggest is the solution, though? Is just kind of conscious synthetic development, pure development of synthetic 5-MeO?
People, yeah, I think there's some risk in the bufotenine too. Like there is some medical risk there for sure. So like I think that people need to be aware of that. I think if people want to be authentic and be really really spiritual, be ultra spiritual, quote unquote, and respect the earth, respect these things, perhaps they do toad venom only once every 4 or 10 years and synthetic the rest of the time, perhaps it follows your Saturn return like every 28 years or something. Like I don't know the move, but
your Bufo return.
Yeah. Like doing less means you think it's more sacred. In some ways, and same perhaps with ayahuasca, where people are doing it sometimes weekly. I don't want to, shit on the Christian traditions like UDV Santo Daime who are doing it very regularly, but I believe they're doing it at lesser dosages, and that's my guess. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I mean, that's not dissimilar to like any relationship that we have as consumers with anything that's a commodity. Like say gasoline or fish. It's like you take fish. We're in danger of fishing out the oceans completely, right? So like, how do we, so I mean, what are you going to say? Well, I'm just never going to eat tuna ever again, but you can just say, okay, I'm just going to have it once a month, right? So I mean,
like a pacing.
We have to face that same question on so many parts of our what we thought were just endless supplies within our nestled into our daily life, into our society, right? Because they're not finite, they're not infinite.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be conscious about it, and that's and when you bring it up within the psychedelic culture, it's such a great, it's such a profound thing to bring up, and that kind of setup because psychedelics are all about consciousness expansion. And hopefully consciousness expansion can translate into the rest of your life, being a more conscious citizen, a more conscious consumer, a more conscious, person who's not harming the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you find the balance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is just me shotgunning, right? Like I don't I reserve the right to change my opinion at any point.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, so that was kind of part one. Part two is these guys are kind of, ladies too, in some places, are kind of just playing fast and loose and being a little risky with 5-MeO, running all over the world, dosing people, not necessarily having a great background, kind of like you were saying, the word shaman earlier is being overused. Some of these folks don't really understand what consent is. There's a gentleman quite prominent in the 5-MeO world. He'll go unnamed for now. Doing non-consensual water in the face, forcing people to stand while under the influence of 5-MeO, sometimes using an electrical taser device on them, all non-consensually. Like as soon as they smoke the drug, the consent is out the window. So it would have to be provided beforehand. And often it's not. In fact, most of the reports I've read and heard from folks is that he's doing it just kind of out of the blue because this is what he feels is right. Feeling is apparently back in over science and over consent in a lot of these circles. So I think that's really dangerous, and it really bothers me. And right now, one of the biggest issues that we're seeing is kind of like bullying meets sexual assault. There's a couple people in Colorado I'm aware of who are not great. I think they have been sexual offenders, sexual perpetrators, sexual assault perpetrators, and because we're in this kind of illegal, quasi-weird state, or just such a weird small world, people don't want to either lose their community, lose their leader, or just go through the whole ordeal of bringing the police in.
Right.
Were you also on drugs? Then we're not going after you, kind of thing.
Right.
And this is a systemic issue in the research and sacramental world too. I don't know enough that I want to like really speak to it on that level, but obviously in the ayahuasca world, there's plenty of sexual violence.
Yeah, and where I go to with that whole discussion is that with ayahuasca, I mean, do you think that it is 100% necessary that it's done under those conditions? Like when you do LSD or mushrooms, you can do it with a friend on a beach, and you guys are in your own setting and your own kind of guidance system as responsible psychonaut. So like, does it have to be that ayahuasca is part of it has to be within ceremony? It has to be. I mean, I understand the benefits of really tuning into its sacred roots and really connecting with spirit and connecting the other elements of shamanism into the experience. But if you're doing that, you're putting yourself under the guidance of an individual. And so, some may argue that psychedelics are about finding your individuality, expressing your individuality, and, going with your own cosmic intuition, and not like taking part, if you're in a group ayahuasca ceremony and the shaman is saying, okay, now we're going to do this chant and stand up and dance. Well, what if you don't feel like it? What if your intuition is telling you to do something else? So I don't know.
Right.
I'm just putting out the question.
I'm on your level.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to jump in with a shaman or a community that's been doing it for a while, but to what degree is that actually required? I know people that have done quite well doing ayahuasca solo. I'm not going to ever recommend anybody does that, but people are going to do it. And as long as you have preparation and whatever else, like maybe you're going to be okay.
Right. And I don't think it necessarily is wrong or right. It just, every spiritual practice can take a step into evolution and change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like we're seeing yoga change in the West. Like, what is yoga? What is the practice of yoga? If somebody's doing it that way, is it no longer yoga now? Can you not call it that? Well, same with psychedelics. I'm not encouraging anyone to do ayahuasca alone, but.
Yeah, it's interesting if thinking about using psychedelics or, going back to yoga and like how like changing those cultural narratives around it. Like, are we in a process since we're in like a different stage or just totally different culture? Like, how do we integrate that into our culture now? Yeah, I don't know. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I know the cultural appropriation subject is very popular lately, very controversial. Yeah, and this extends into this conversation as well, too. It's like, when people are calling themselves shamans all of a sudden, and you are taking these ancient, traditions that are thousands of years old and doing it in Malibu and saying it's authentic. Yeah, I don't know, but I think, one thing is for certain, like America is kind of the land of cultural appropriation. I mean, very little is truly American, I mean, we're entirely a culture and a society made up of different traditions and people from different places and different roots, and very few things are uniquely American. I mean, this is the melting pot. So I think the same applies to, psychedelic traditions as well as Eastern mysticism. It's like everything can be adaptable as long as the intention and the consciousness is in a good place.
Mm-hmm. It makes me wonder, and I don't know how I'm going to phrase this, but just like Ram Dass, for example, bringing over the teachings from India that, he learned from his teacher who was at spacing on his name. Yeah, exactly. And then bringing it over here and, teaching a lot of people about those teachings.
Yeah, I mean, he just brought them over, and essentially, I mean, the teachings were, so non-dogmatic. I mean, they just were based in love, service, the celebration of God, remembering God, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, and same with Terence McKenna, bringing over, indigenous, all sorts of different indigenous modalities into the psychedelic world, and mushrooms and DMT, and I think it's a good thing as long as we pay respect,
Mm-hmm.
and not ignore the roots, not take it for granted. Just keep those traditions alive and well, and honor them the best that we can.
Definitely. And to go back on something you said about, like, the 60s with lack of integration, like moving forward now, how do you view integration of these experiences? And how do we, like, maybe not make the same mistakes?
Well, the great thing about doing psychedelics today, as I would think as a young person, is that there's so much data. There are so many examples and role models to look at, and so many great teachers. Whereas in, 1965, there really weren't. Everybody was figuring it out then.
Right.
So there is so much to fall back on now. And best practices is, what are the best practices based on data? Is we know what the setting looks like. We know what the best setup and what the optimal conditions are to create the best psychedelic experience. So that really, really, really helps. People aren't going in blind anymore. So I think that sets up, your path to integration much more gracefully, because you can really set your intention much more clearly than ever before. And so I think that's where it lies. It's about setting your intention going into the experience, rather than just like, oh my God, I don't know what this is. I'm just going to get high and dance around at a Grateful Dead concert. I mean, there's a lot of heart space, data available for anybody who is a potential psychonaut. So I think that's where it starts. It starts with the intention.
Mm.
And that creates better integration possibilities. That's what I think. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up, Kyle. I'm thinking this integration thing, if it can become more popular, which it is, it's accelerating rapidly in the world, perhaps that leads to less consumption, more rare molecules. Like perhaps you get more comfortable with acid and smoke less toad. Like what? Like I know it's a long ride, but this stuff goes a long way.
Well, what I'd like to see is less consumption of MDMA. Because I love MDMA as much as anyone, but it's so easy to get into the overconsumption.
So what specifically are you seeing? Like people just doing like a half gram in a night kind of thing?
That and just, we've been seeing this for decades, since the beginning of rave culture, but like every weekend at the rave, And
I hope people are realizing that that's not healthy. Like they must feel it on Tuesday.
I hope so too.
Are you seeing that accelerate or kind of stay still, or?
I'm seeing it it's plateaued.
Right.
I don't think it's better or worse. It's out there, and I hope people can really step back from that and know.
And that's more about bodily harm, right, than any other concern or psychological bodily harm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We want to erase that from the psychedelic discussion.
Can you anonymize the story, Kyle, that you told me about every weekend use?
Oh, somebody's telling me they've been doing that for the past like 15 years.
I thought that was really intense.
Yeah.
Was it both nights, like Friday and Saturday night?
I don't remember what they said, but it was pretty much like every weekend. And I don't know how true that was, but it
you
could
never
have been.
know. Yeah. I only know like 2 people that do it every weekend. I think that's crazy. Like everybody needs to back off to like 4 to 6 weeks, guys. Like I know it sucks. You got to find other drugs or whatever, or Maybe just be with your mind for a while. It's okay.
I think 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah. Like Anne Shulgin was very cautious because she lost her capability to get high from it, which is really tricky. I don't ever want that to happen.
I think she said take it 10 or 15 times in a lifetime, something like that, right?
Oh God.
Yeah, she told me the 2 or 3 times a year thing once. Yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. So much more we could talk about, Zach.
We'll have to have you back on
if you're.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this stuff with you guys for ages. I love it.
Any commentary on the Singularity? You sent me a message from there earlier today.
Oh yeah, that's my sign off on my phone.
I liked it.
I just like that because I like the idea of what the singularity implies. That there are parallel paths going on. And if the parallel path of advanced computer aided evolution is simultaneously happening, what is that moment going to look like? Yeah, I don't think it's going to be one date and time like Kurzweil thinks, but it's fun to play with for sure.
I work for a major AI software company, and
oh, you do? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so just watching it, I'm like, I don't know. It's going to be a lot longer than Ray suggests, in my opinion.
And I think much more gradual.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not just like all of a sudden history's gone.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be all of us. Oh, wow, gradually for 50 years. It's been here. Oh, my God, this is it. It's been
yeah, it's these predictions are funny. It's like you get so certain on your prediction, then it doesn't work. It's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
Just be here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious. There's probably a bunch of influences, but I'm wondering what are some of your major influences in the psychedelic world?
Well, I would have to, as far as people go?
Yeah, people.
I mean, I'm really with the standards, Terrence and Jim Fadiman and, of course, my dad. There's no question about that. And Sasha Shulgin and Aldous Huxley, for sure. Dennis McKenna as well. And, of course, Ram Dass. I do consider Ram Dass, even though he really, went east, I still consider him to be a psychedelic pioneer. Yeah, so those are my core go-to influences. Nothing shocking there. I know it's kind of a boring response. It's just like, oh, we've heard of all those people. I know, but those are the ones that changed my life as well. And I could also want to add the Grateful Dead as well, even though it's reflected in a different method, in a different art form. Their contribution to psychedelic culture, not just the culture and community, but also how their music became an ongoing representation of what the psychedelic mind can do to art, I think is still an endless gift that they gave the world. I love the Dead.
I've seen Further.
Okay.
I could go see, quote unquote, the Dead this year, but yeah, I'm becoming more a fan of Joe Russo's Almost Dead. I like their pace.
They're great. Highly energetic.
Yeah. So one last thing, like say you bump into somebody, they clearly just seem like they're overusing. They might not be mentally ill. Like they're kind of a little speeded out or something from too much acid or too much whatever. Do you have anything you usually do to help cool them out? Because I'm sure you get some weird kind of over the top folks reaching out to you once in a while.
Absolutely. Well, you mean actually being on the substance or just...
Maybe not when they're high, but just let's say when they're not high, just because we've talked about people being high a lot.
Yeah. Well, take a break for one, really take a cold, hard look at your frequency, and really get honest with that. It's so easy to spiritually bypass and get into the, start reciting, great, passages and dissertations from, the various pioneers and using it as a way to justify your frequency, and that, you've got to keep going back in over and over and over again. Really take a look at that and reduce frequency and just step away from it and take a a look at your intention. Yeah, I mean, I do get those a lot. And if you feel that once you've stepped back and you still feel very like discombobulated and kind of a confused mess, to talk to someone, there's no harm in, getting help and asking for guidance on the issue and finding a way to sort it all out and just to simplify it.
Yeah. Awesome. I might have one more question too. How do you see like the future of psychedelics integrated? Like what do you see? Like how would you like to see the future of this field evolve, or just how our culture will use them and integrate them into our lives?
Well, I think we're seeing the early, I think we're seeing the rumblings of what's going to come. I think there's going to be a firmly legitimate place in the psychiatric world for psychedelic therapy. And that's fantastic. I mean, we're already seeing where MDMA is going, but I think that's going to extend to psilocybin and LSD as well. So that is great. And, just seeing it as a legitimate, medically recognized option for treating various conditions. We're going to see that really escalating in our society within the next, 10 to 15 years. And I just hope that carries over into recreational use and cognitive liberty, because both are important as well. Allowing people the right to change their consciousness.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I do have to run, but thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody check out It's All Happening and the MAPS podcast. Thanks, Zach Leary. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Bluebird Botanicals for sponsoring the show. Really appreciate them. They are independently lab tested, so you can go on their site to check out the purity ratings and to see if there's any impurities that you might not want. Spoiler alert, there are not any impurities you're not going to want in there. They're a really high-end company, and I really, really trust them and appreciate what they're doing to move the future of CBD as supplement forward. Yeah, I have to be careful with the language there because DEA is always watching. Same with the FDA. But yeah, CBDs are wonderful. They're non-psychoactive, and I find them very helpful personally. Jury's still out clinically, but do some research. You owe it to yourself to at least read up on CBDs generally, and then to also read up on Bluebird more specifically. So again, if you want to join us in Jamaica, please let us know. We'd love to have you. The retreat is from May 16 through 23, a little over a month away. We are very excited and can't wait. There's going to be 3 mushroom sessions, 2 breathwork sessions, and a lot of time spent talking, community, and learning together. So definitely would love to have you. To learn more, go to mycomeditations.com. And if you want to support us and don't have the spare funds right now, tell your friends about Psychedelics today, or listen to all our episodes. Let us know what you think. We'd love to have some feedback on that. And even better for us might be reviews on iTunes or Facebook or Google or Stitcher, or whatever podcast app you're using. We'd just love to have more feedback. And if you want to get in touch with us, the email is psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all for listening to the show, and hope you tune in again for the next one.